This is Liz Levine, and I am a Major Gifts Officer at SAIS. I'm here with Peter Bertocci from the SAIS class of... Bertocci?
That's right.
From the SAIS class of 1963, and today is April 11th, 2013. So first, I'd like to ask you what brought you to SAIS?
Well, I was an undergraduate in history at Bates College in Maine, and toward the end of my undergraduate career, I became interested in international relations, and so I started looking at places. I had no idea, what where one went to study such things, but fortunately, I had a professor who knew about SAIS and recommended it as one of the places that I considered, and so I did. I looked into it, and looked fine to me, and so I basically managed to get in, and I came here. That was the reason primarily, of the several different places. I like the fact that it was in Washington for one thing, so that's basically something just as simple as that. Matter of interest and a place that would meet my interests, and it was fine.
Okay. And could you tell me your most vivid SAIS memory?
See, there you have the question. I don't know how to ask about them. Well, I don't know that I have a single vivid memory. I have a fond memory of being at SAIS for 2 years and enjoying all of the courses that I have. Don't know if there was a particularly most vivid one, but it's just a very pleasurable 2 years. I liked my students. I liked most of the professors I had. We all remember, of course, the Wide World course. We used to have this big, the only course we all had to take together, the United States in a Changing World Environment, as it was called, which we quickly all, some wags said, oh yeah, that's the Wide World course. And that was over here in the Brookings Institution, which I think is right across the street. Okay? And I remember that as something I enjoyed, and over the years. But if any one single thing, not so much. But just it was the overall time frame, the overall period of being here was something I have fond memories of.
Great. Any interesting stories of anything that happened while you're here? Not the most interesting, but any?
Well, you know what I remember, and we were just thinking about it today, we were talking about, what various and sundry mistakes the United States has made in foreign policy, and someone, of course, brought up Vietnam. And I remember, in retrospect, Professor John Snow, whom I probably passed away a long time ago, he was an Asia specialist. And I remember him saying once to a class that, well, I'm going to leave it a little bit early today because I'm going down to consult. I don't remember whether it was the State Department or the Hill. He says, try to advise them to try to not get into Vietnam. In retrospect, I remember that very, very distinctly. Something once said, and so as an item in the class. Other than that, so that it's a small thing, but it sticks in my mind, And I like the fact that this man had been. He was a specialist in Burma, where he had spent some time. We used to have a place in Rangoon, did we not? And I think he had spent time there. He also had been, I think, political officer in New Delhi at some point, in addition to being a professor. And I like the fact that we had professors who were constantly involved back and forth, in not only academically, but also operationally in advising government, not only representative, but also the executive branches. It's always very good. So, that's what I would say.
Are there any other professors that you remember?
Well, I was going to say that the course that influenced me most, curiously enough, because it was not in a subject that I thought I was good at, was Professor Isaiah Frank's course in economic development. And I took it for the whole 2 semesters, even though I never thought of myself as being very good at economics. But I had spent a year in India before I came to SAIS, and I was developing an interest in South Asia, and particularly issues of development in South Asia. And so I was sort of inspired by his class to want to move on and learn more about that subject, which is why I went on to get a PhD in anthropology as opposed to going out and working for a living, you might say. So I think that was that probably, as far as academic experiences, was the one which I think most influenced me most. And partially that reason, even though, as I say, economics was never a subject I thought I was very good at, but anyway. What I was interested in in that class was the social and political side of development more than just the sort of economic side. It's all one of a piece anyway, and so that's what influenced me in terms of my later educational decisions as well as academic decisions, as well as professional decisions.
Great. And could you tell us what you've done since SAIS and how SAIS has affected your career?
Okay. Well, science has affected me all my life because it gave me the basic orientation, professional orientation toward international relations, which I wanted in the first place. So no matter what, even though I became a professor of anthropology, I always maintained an interest at a global level. A lot of anthropologists don't do that. They find some little village someplace, become an expert on that, and that's what they do. Well, I kind of did that, but I also, everything I've always done is in the context of the macro picture as far as global international relations is concerned. And that is the result of, I think I had that orientation anyway. SAIS reinforced it. It gave me some of the professional tools needed to think about it. And even though I went on to specialize in a totally other discipline, and one which does not necessarily lend itself to international relations as such, I mean, anthropology is by definition cross-cultural, intercultural, but it doesn't mean that people focus on politics. So what I later on then did within anthropology was to focus on development, the politics of development in the context of international relations, the Cold War at the time, post-Cold War, that kind of. I've never really stopped being interested in international relations, and I find that I probably, when I get talking to people in anthropology, I usually have a much better grasp of what's going on in the world than most of them do, because they're not. I mean, a lot of anthropologists are very political because they're working through world countries and they get very exercised about what's happening in certain world countries. But I've always had that sort of world global perspective, international relations perspective, which was, I would say, certainly reinforced and trained here at SAIS. So I wouldn't be who I am today in terms of the way I think had it not been for being at SAIS and having SAIS both reinforce and add on to an interest which I had already started to become, that I had already started to develop.
Great. And could you talk in a little bit more detail about your career path?
Sure.
Since after SAIS?
Right out of college, before I came to SAIS, I spent a year in Calcutta. And that is the Bengal region of South Asia, and it's split down the middle. Muslim side ending up in Bangladesh, the Hindu side staying within the India part of British India after 1947. And I went out to Michigan State University, partly because that was a university in which they had a lot of projects that they were consulting on, helping guide a number of projects all over the world. And one of them was in what at that time was still East Pakistan. And the reason I was interested in that was because I started learning the Bengali language and developing an interest in the Bengali culture, subculture of South Asia. And, everybody who specializes in India sooner or later specializes in one region or another. It's like, India, in another history, India could have been 13 countries. It's, like Europe, right? Ended up divided along ethno-linguistic lines the way Europe eventually did, post-World War I. And it didn't, but anyway, I became interested in the Bengal region and in development, so I ended up, very few people had ever even gone to East Pakistan. It was not then, and it's not now, particularly, salient part of the world in terms of international importance. But because it had some interesting things going on in development, I wanted to go there and do my doctoral research there, and so I did. Went to Michigan State University, as I say, because they had places like that where one could, they had projects like that to which one could attach oneself and get a PhD or some dissertation out of it, in addition to getting practical, hands-on experience with what it's like to work in to try to get developing societies moving forward. And so I became a specialist. Now, it turns out Bangladesh, well, East Pakistan was, again, only 3 or 4 people have been there doing the kind of research I was doing. I ended up probably doing some of the important early work on how the villages in that particular country are organized. And I guess it'd be fair to say that, for lack of anything better, for about the next 10 years after I finished my thesis, it was read by everybody else who wanted to go there. Now the question was, why did they want to go there? Well, 1971, the breakup of Pakistan, in which the Bengalis, the East Pakistanis, wanted to be independent of the country because they felt they had been maltreated by the West Pakistanis. Well, you probably know all that background, but so right after, in Bangladesh, of course, was a war. It went from March to December of 1971. It was one of those, after Biafra, one of the most, Biafra, of course, was in Nigeria, was one of those bloody secessionist wars which ended very badly for the people who tried to secede. Bangladeshis managed to secede quite nicely thanks to Indian intervention, but it was a bit of a cause célèbre, as they say. In fact, it was the very first rock concert for humanitarian reasons. The concert for Bangladesh was about Bangladesh. So, needless to say, all kinds of people wanted to go to Bangladesh and do development work. And I get all these people, they wanted to, how can we get a hold of your thesis? Well, just like Xerox microfilms in out of Michigan, you get it for $20. So that sort of, so then I sort of became a specialist, known as a specialist in Bangladesh, and that's how I continued to work on it for a number of years, particularly interested in what I'd like to call rural political economy, the politics, the local politics of development, how village factions and village social structures impact with people who are trying to move them along in various ways, and that interested me. Later on, by that time, of course, I was finishing a PhD at Michigan State. Michigan State had, there was a sub-campus of it near Detroit, the town of Rochester, Michigan, in Oakland County. And so my first job was at Michigan State University at Oakland. 1971, or thereabouts, we broke off and it became Oakland University. So I ended up teaching there, and that's been with my career until 2010. So I taught anthropology, I taught South Asian studies. Later on I got interested, because I had worked in a Muslim country, Bangladesh being a Muslim majority country, and had developed an interest in Islam. You start doing Islam, eventually you have to learn something about the Middle East, and so I started teaching a little bit about the Middle East. But I also taught a course in development stuff, and also taught stuff in rural peasant politics, that kind of thing. And towards the end I started getting interested in religion, in particular, the particular version of Islam that you find practiced in that part of the world. And the last time I did any field work there was on the phenomenon of the adulation of holy men, which is a whole part about Islam, which is in almost every Muslim country that nobody knows anything about. It's the fact that, and it's because it's a kind of, it's a thing which, the real cleavage in the Muslim world is between I hate the word fundamentalists, but I'll use it because it comes to top, who want a strict adherence to, the 5 pillars and all of that. And then large numbers of people who do that, but also have a personal relationship with somebody who may consider to be a Sufi. Okay? Popular Islam, at least in Bangladesh and probably in a lot of other places that I've read about, it comes out of Sufism. And it's related to it in some way. And it's the idea that you become the disciple of someone who knows, who helps you have your own direct relationship with Allah. And I got interested in that, and I spent 5 or 6 months studying that. Just a preliminary study, and that's the last time I was there. So sorry, long discourse, but that's essentially what I've done. Now again, all of that is, again, part of never ever forgetting, that this is all part of, international politics, and that's the SAIS part of me. So I'm really a combination of SAIS, well, Bates College, which is another whole story, SAIS, and MSU. That's kind of, and all those things have contributed to making my life very pleasant. I've enjoyed what I'm doing, and that's it.
Great. Is there any advice you would have for today's students?
Yeah, I think if you're not interested in what's happening on the ground to local people, you really should be. That's the anthropologist that we're talking, okay? A lot of people end up with long careers abroad, never ever really having much contact with locals. And that's too bad. I think SAIS people should, okay? I mean, I don't know what happens, but I would say always keep an eye on what's happening when you're abroad, when you're doing whatever you end up doing. As much contact with local people as you possibly can. Get out of the expat community and just relate to local people. I think you'll enjoy it. As opposed to, and maybe be more effective in whatever it is you're doing, depending upon what you're doing. If you're running an oil company, probably not. But if you're representing the U.S. government, probably. Okay? Anyway, that would be my advice.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to add to your oral history?
Not particularly, no. I think I've bored you enough.
Well, great. Thank you so much. And that is all we've got.
Okay, great.